I want to just thank everybody and welcome you to another great Get Connected CEO C-Suite mentoring session. This is our last for the month, but we have saved the best for last. So I want to say for those of you who are new to Get Connected is Boston's premier inclusive business networking event that brings together people from all cultural backgrounds across industries and sectors for the purpose of making positive cross-cultural connections, learning, and really making our city more welcoming and inclusive to those of us who are culturally different. So we are delighted today because we have two wonderful mentors and our host. For those who have been coming to our Get Connected CEO C-Suite mentoring, you know that these are one among our most popular. Our founding partners, Blue Cross and Blue Shield, have hosted this for the last 5 years. And just because we are doing it social distancing, there's no reason why they shouldn't be a co-host and a host of this event. So we have Stephanie Browne, who is going to talk to us a little later. And we have Dr. Lee Pelton, the president of my alma mater. I loved it so much that I actually went there twice for my undergraduate and my graduate. And Mary Jo Meisner, who is a very dear friend and also a founding partner of Get Connected through her work at the Boston Foundation, where she was the #2 person. But let me just say before I introduce Stephanie, Stephanie has been just an amazing diversity, inclusion, and equity VP at Blue Cross and Blue Shield. In just the short 3 years that she has taken the helm of this job, has literally transformed the institution. She is very lucky because she does diversity, equity, and inclusion the way it ought to be done. She has the full support and imprimatur of the CEO, Andrew Dreyfus. And for those of you who have heard me say this numerous times, Blue Cross and Blue Shield is one of our founding partners. They were among the first company to step up. And I was just reminding Stephanie that way back when, over 30 years ago, Blue Cross and Blue Shield also was a founding partner for the partnership. So this has been part of that company's DNA. And she has taken it to new heights and higher levels and has done just a phenomenal job of diversifying the workforce and bringing insights and keen understanding of what it means to be a company that truly embraces diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So, and she has been a phenomenal partner to me personally and to Get Connected. So I am just delighted that she's here with us because she's actually on her vacation. So that's how important this is to her. And I am just grateful that she was willing to step out of vacation mode and come to a Zoom webinar to welcome us. So Stephanie, thank you so much, my friend. And I am so delighted that you are here.
Thank you, Colette. Blue Cross is really proud to continue to support Get Connected as a founding sponsor. During these unprecedented times, it's so important just to stay the course with our partners. I'm also honored to be kicking off this C-suite conversation with two of Boston's amazing leaders, Dr. Lee Pelton and Mary Jo Meisner. You know, early this morning, I was watching Good Morning America, and Robert Roberts interviewed her past boss, the head of ABC News, about a book that he wrote a while back, but updated it to talk about the chronicle, actually wanted to chronicle people, how people react during crisis. And during that conversation, they spoke about how people are handling the pandemic. And that actually really resonated with me. He said 10% of the leaders are being, 10% of the people are being leaders and taking, I call the bull by the horns to help people. He said 80% are following the leader and helping us keep safe. But then there's this 10% that are being disruptive, not being considerate of others, and I call prolonging the madness. So I thought about it, well, which one are you? And as I thought about myself, I thought about what could I leave you guys with as I turn you back over to Colette and the team that will walk you through some of the facts around what's happening today. And I thought about what you can do your part is to think about, are you making sure you're giving your total attention to the total health of the community, your families, and yourself? So I would say to you right now, be strong, stay well, and we will get to the other side of this. So thank you, Colette, for allowing me to open this session. And I'm going to turn it back over to you so you, Lee, and Mary Jo can have a conversation.
Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your week. And I hope the weather holds beautifully for you. And you get to go to the beach with your mask on, of course.
Thanks.
Yes, so let me just say a big thank you to my team, to Mirav, and to Ariel, and to Lars Eric Seren, our producer, for making tonight possible and making it look very easy. I am just delighted. Lee Pelton, I was saying before we officially opened that I am proud to have been on the search committee that picked Dr. Pelton as the president for Emerson College. And I have to say that he has exceeded all of our expectations. I have to congratulate him. He was just named by the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce a distinguished Bostonian. So now, Lee, you are officially a Bostonian. So, you know, it takes generations to become a Bostonian. We have now officially made you not just a Bostonian, but a distinguished one. So I am delighted for you for that. And you have elevated Emerson into a whole new level. The trajectory of this college have just been amazing, both internationally, and we have now expanded the campus to the West Coast, to Europe, and have made learning just innovative, interesting for our students. And you are one of the leading thought leaders in our city and across the country when it comes to higher education. And what I love about what you have done at Emerson is that you have brought liberal arts and married it with technology, with innovation, with communications, and with the arts. So that to me is like what a full person's life is really about, including all of those parts. to make you a fully developed whole person. And your work with young people at the Boston Arts Academy has been phenomenal. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Mary Jo Meisner, who is a very dear friend. She's like my sister from another mother. And she is also an honoree of Get Konnected as a diversity, equity, and inclusion honoree last year when we honored what we called woke white women. And she is a woke white woman. She has been an advocate and a phenomenal champion and supporter of equity, of inclusion, and was one of Get Konnected's first sponsors. She came to one of our events and she said to me, the Boston Foundation needs to be a partner here because what you're doing in the city of Boston is really creating a safe space where people of all backgrounds can come and interact and break down barriers and get to know each other. So thank you for that. And she continues. She is currently working with Get Konnected as we pivot and go to some new and exciting things. And so she is at the epicenter of that, and not just my company. She's also working with BECMA, the Boston Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. So she walks the talk. And we are so lucky to have both her and Lee. Lee is, I think this is your 5th year, Lee, or your 4th, I believe, as a mentor.
Yes.
4?
Yeah,
yeah,
4 or 5, I'm not sure which. Yeah.
Yes, and Mary Jo, this is, I believe, your 2nd or 3rd. But we are so lucky, and this conversation is going to be very rich. So I'm going to start with you, Lee. And I'm going to ask you, how has the pandemic impacted institutions of higher ed in general and Emerson in particular? And since I believe that there is no going back to what was thought of as normal, because now we have found out normal really wasn't working, I would like to hear how this has changed higher ed and how you see this working for the current students and future students who will be coming. Because I know we have out in the audience parents, graduates, people thinking about where am I going to send my kid and how is this going to impact us? So I would love to hear from you.
Yeah. Well,
they said they can't, it was said they cannot see Lee. Danella, can you see Lee now? Wave if you can. Now we can, yes, good.
Okay. Well, let me make a general statement, and it's a simple statement but very profound, and that is that we must all understand that we are going to be living in a COVID environment for a long time. And probably until we are able to develop, manufacture, and deliver a vaccine to 300 million people. And that's going to be a challenge. You know, people are working, pharmas are working furiously right now, as we all know, on a vaccine, but I think we also know that the fastest we've ever been able, the quickest we've been able to deliver a vaccine, and that is to manufacture it and deliver it, has been 4 years. So even if we cut that in half the time, that's a 2-year period. So that's, I think we all understand that, but what it means is that we are going to have to live in an environment in which we adapt to the virus and the consequences of the virus. You know, I think 3 months ago or 2 months ago, I think people were thinking, well, if we could just get through the end of this year, and then everything will be okay, you know, in January. Well, that's not going to happen. We're going to be living in this world for a long time. And, you know, I think understanding that has an impact on not only how we live our lives, but how we manage our businesses, including higher education. So that proposition and that view of the world suggests that colleges and universities will have to adapt to this world by reopening at some point. Mm-hmm. You know, and there are a variety of scenarios out there. We're all trying furiously to figure out what's the best way for our institution. What we hear from students, undergraduates at least, is that they want to be back on their campuses. That's 7 out of 10 of Emerson students tell us that, and nationwide, 8 out of 10 tell us that. Their parents want them to be back as well, not in those high degree, not so vigorously, but it's still 6 in 10 parents and so on. So what higher education is struggling with right now is, when do we reopen our campuses? And the vast majority of institutions are saying that we're going to try to reopen our campuses in the fall, and we're going to in person, but knowing several things: that the health and safety of our students, our faculty, our staff is upmost. That we'll have to develop a way to test, baseline testing plus what's called surveillance testing. That we will have to do. We'll have to do what's, contact tracing, and so on and so forth. We'll have to de-densify our institutions. That means fewer people in the classrooms, fewer students in the dorms. Maybe staff will continue to work remotely, and so on. And it's more likely than not that those of us, like Emerson, we're going to open up in person. We'll also have some version of remote learning. I shouldn't say remote learning, but I should say digital learning, that could be for students who are on campus, but who are in their rooms taking online courses because you want to de-densify the classrooms. So some will be in the classroom, some won't, or they'll be all staggered or something like that. There may be students, and there will be students and families who don't want to come back to college, or who won't come to college for the first time. And so we have to provide remote learning for them. And we have to provide alternate ways of engaging with the institution that keeps them here. What I tell my staff is this: we can lose tuition, but we have to keep the student. And what that means is you might lose tuition in the short term, but you want to make sure that you engage students so that they remain with you for 3 years or 3.5 years, and so on. So I think that's what you can expect from most places. Some places have already declared that they're going to go online. The Cal State system has 500,000 students, 500,000 students, and it would cost them $25 million a week to test their population. So they've decided to go online. They came out early. I think they're an outlier. Most places are looking, as I said, as some version of in-person and remote. And I can talk about the particular challenges for Emerson, but I think I'll just stop there.
Okay, thanks, Lee. That was very insightful. I am going to go to Mary Jo, because you have sort of worked in multiple, industries, and most recently in philanthropy. And one of the things that has happened that the COVID pandemic has sort of revealed to all of us is the gaps in our systems, our healthcare, our economic system, our education system. And I am wondering, as someone who has come out of philanthropy and who have done a phenomenal job of really making the Boston Foundation very much, you know, sort of the epicenter of creating changes in the systems in Boston and spotlighting and highlighting trends and where policymakers should be looking and going. What do you think we should be asking of our civic leaders, our policymakers around this inequity and how they could be addressing these policies?
Well, I think you've hit, Colette, on one of the most important issues that has come out of COVID, and one of the cruelest. So, you know, the dilemma we have is that COVID just kind of continues to show us this incredible inequity and inequality that communities of color have had to deal with for decades. And we knew this. We've known this all along. I mean, in the last year, I was at the Boston Foundation in 2015, 2016. We were celebrating our 100th anniversary. And we used it as an opportunity to talk about income inequality. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's ironic, isn't it, that that was 5 years ago, 4 years ago. Yeah. And we were hosting, you know, several research projects and community conversations and forums about this issue. But really, it's been there with us for a long time, but here comes COVID. And what it's done for us is to just really put a huge stake in the ground on this issue. And I guess I would say one thing I've noticed over the last several months is that actually there appears to be, you know, a lot more attention being paid to this issue and to the inequities. And it's become a topic of conversations, not just at the Boston Foundation, not just at our Understanding Boston forums, not just at these special events we were hosting, but that it's become a topic of conversation by wider groups of people. And, you know, most appreciably, frankly, by the public and the private sector leadership. So I think now it's just so incumbent on us now to make sure that that doesn't go away as, you know, as the reopening and the so-called kind of return to normal, what, as Lee said, whatever normal becomes. I mean, it's going to be with us for a long time. But that's not a norm that we want, right? We don't want that norm. That norm of income inequality, of inequity, of people of color being in a different kind of category. So we want to use this crisis. I mean, I don't know, was it Churchill or whoever said, you know, you really need, or I forget who, probably.
A good crisis go to waste.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's, you know, we want to use this crisis to learn a new way of doing business and creating new policies and norms that realize these kind of gaps and you know, issues that have been with us for a long time, so that we can begin to create new platforms and new procedures and ways of treating each other. So, yeah, I mean, those of us who have worked in philanthropy, who have worked in various other kinds of, you know, maybe more what people would say would have been softer issues or mission-driven issues. We knew this. We have been working on this. Lee's been working on it. Colette, you've been working on it. But now we all need to work on this. And it's become so clear that as we come out of this, we can do better. We actually can use this as a time to change it.
May I follow up a little bit?
Sure, absolutely.
Mary Jo, first of all, I just want to thank you for your undaunting commitment to these issues over the years. It's just really been remarkable. And the city and beyond the city really benefited by your commitment. I think we know that this pandemic has been especially disastrous to folks of color, both the living and the dead. We now, I think there are almost 39 million folks who've applied for unemployment.
Yep.
The US unemployment rate is about 14.7% as of today. But in Nevada, the unemployment rate is about 25%. It's almost as high as the unemployment rate for the nation during the height of the Great Depression in the late 20s and early 30s. And most of the folks who are unemployed in Nevada, as we know, are folks of color who work in the entertainment industry, very large Latinx community there. These folks are out of work. That's followed by Hawaii, which I think has a 21% or 22% unemployment rate. Again, primarily folks of color. And in Michigan, especially in Upper Michigan, where the death rate is astronomical, it has impacted folks of color in those urban areas. I think we also know that that many folks of color have, what's called these comorbidities that make them most vulnerable to the virus. And I would suggest that these comorbidities are not simply the result of, less optimal eating habits and so on and so forth. It's the legacy of slavery in this country. It's the legacy of structural racism in this country. And it is coming to the front in a way that is startling, but also makes it very clear where we are. I'm a trustee of the Bar Foundation. We have about $2 billion in grants and so, in endowment. And so we, along with some other well-funded philanthropic organizations, are pivoting from grants for specific projects to grants for general operating budgets. I'm sure the Boston Foundation is doing the same thing to help these organizations, especially the small social organizations, survive, because that's what they need right now. They need general operating support so they can survive and get on the other side of this pandemic.
You so very well said, both Mary Jo and Lee. And, I feel like in some ways that this pandemic, because it's like a forensic MRI in that it has exposed all of these, inequities And it's like we cannot unsee what we have seen. And I am hoping that, there will be system changes, because we have to get to the root cause of some of these issues. So I'm going to ask Mary Jo, because Betty Francisco and Aixa Bisham did a very compelling op-ed in the Boston Globe about 2 weeks ago, where they talked about the lack of, the inequity rather, in the disbursement of funds, often to organizations that are led by people of color and within the philanthropic community. And one of the things they were doing were calling out to the philanthropic community to really begin to address this inequity. And I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that, as someone who have worked in philanthropy for over 15 years.
Yeah, well, Colette, I think it's a really good question. And I mean, frankly, I don't think the philanthropic community is any different than, other sectors and other industries. I mean, in the end, we're all part of, this society that we've grown up in. And we're, it's the private sector, the public sector, the nonprofit sector, the philanthropic sector. One would maybe perhaps think that the softer sectors, the nonprofit sector or the philanthropic sector, would perhaps act differently or make decisions differently. And indeed they do, in the sense that they're mission driven at their core. And, I'm quite proud of the Boston Foundation. I'm quite proud of the nonprofit sector, but we're all part of what we've come up with and what we've grown up with. And the same concerns and problems that we have in terms of equity and inclusion and diversity and leadership and who runs these institutions reside there just as they do everywhere else. And so, yes, we need to be, quite purposeful and aware of the decisions that we are making, both about our grant making and how we do our work, but also in terms of the leaders and the leadership that we have. And, what you didn't mention is that, I don't know, some people are kind of surprised when they learn that I wasn't just at the Boston Foundation, that I actually had, a whole career, 25 years
journalism
in the newspaper business. And, I was quite, I had lots of different newspaper journalism jobs and kind of had moved my way up to some fairly, significant positions. But, that the issues of race and diversity were so writ large in the media and still are. And so, as I moved through that career and trying to have impact as a journalist, part of the impact you needed to have was about how do you make decisions about what to cover and what not to cover? And how do you decide who's going to be reflected in a story and who's going to be interviewed for a story and all those kinds of things. Who's going to lead a newsroom? One of the, my best things that I tried to do when I was editor of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel was try to hire Greg Moore, who was managing editor of the Boston, assistant managing editor of the Boston Globe. And I tried my hardest to get him to come to Milwaukee, to become managing editor, you know, give him this job. And in the end, he turned it down. There were lots of, you know, reasons, probably one of which he just didn't want to live. His wife didn't want to live in Milwaukee. But, you know, it actually helped Greg become managing editor of the Boston
Editor of the Globe.
because they wanted him to stay. But I mean, that was, you know, what I wanted to do was to bring an African-American man to come to that city to help run the newsroom with me, to make a set of decisions that would change our journalism and kind of have the impact. You know, so we all own these things, but we have to take control of them and be accountable and not just say those things. And it's kind of hackneyed to say you walk the walk and, you know, whatever, but you actually have to.
Right, you have to do the work.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you really touched on the issue of diversity and inclusion in the media. And I'm going to ask Lee a question about higher education. We were putting together the list of the 50 most influential people of color in higher education in Greater Boston. That was supposed to have been our 12th anniversary event, which we had to postpone until the fall. But what struck me about this, Lee, was the fact that there were like 7 or 8 presidents of color right here in Greater Boston. I was quite pleasantly surprised to find that out. And so, and I know that you have a terrific Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion, Sylvia Spares. And so I'm going to ask you, how do we begin to move the dial? You know, we are here in Boston at which I love to call, or Massachusetts, the Athens of education, because we have so many institutions of higher ed. How do we begin to move the dial? And how, if there is anyone out there who is thinking at this time about pivoting or transitioning to a new industry, maybe higher ed, what advice would you give for that? And how do higher education continue to work towards diversifying the administrative as well as the faculty side of the schools?
Well, diversity is one of our pillars of excellence, as it should be at any college or university. I think we're coming to the understanding that diversity is not an add-on. It's not something to be fixed, but rather it's essential to what we do. And you really cannot have excellence without diversity. Mm-hmm. Excellence that is void of diversity is not excellence, it's something else. And that's especially true at colleges and universities, where the curve of student development and intellectual inquiry really depends on our engagement and openness to different ideas and perspectives and backgrounds and heritages and so on and so forth. Because all of that increases it increases our understanding of this nation and who we are and what we stand for. And so that's very, very important. There are some places, and I know that Larry Backow at Harvard has done this fairly well, where, and some other places, they have mentoring programs for senior administrators that is focused primarily on women and folks of color. And Larry's done a great job there. I think we've done a good job at Emerson as well. And it may be that we need to make those programs more visible, you know, outside of our entities so that other folks can participate in them. I do know that I serve as a mentor. I cannot tell you how many you know, people I mentor, people of color who have an interest in coming to higher education in one way or another. And I don't think that, but they shouldn't be just limited to the diversity post, right? They need to be in, you know, in that pipeline that leads to being a president or a senior administrator. When I became this, I'm showing my age now. When I became president for the first time, I was the fourth African-American, only the fourth, to be president of a private college or university outside of the historically Black colleges and universities. And that, just by the numbers that you gave there, we've made some progress. It's been long progress, but I've been president for a long time. You know, 13 years before I came here. So, but we need to develop these pipeline programs, and I think that some places are doing that. You're on mute.
Yeah, I for one, thank you. I for one, I'm so delighted to see that, and I want to say, Lee, that is one of the things that I admire so much about you is, you know, the fact that you give so much of your effort, your energy, your time to really mentoring younger people and even matured people who want to get some insights. And you always find the time. Whenever I call you, no matter how much you have on your plate and how busy, you're always willing to make the time. And that is such a, to me, one of the key things of good leaders, you know, that they realize that they have an obligation to lift others as they climb, and you do that so very well. So thank you for that. Mary Jo, one of the questions that have come into the queue is a person said that they're a small business of color, and one of the things they find so frustrating is the difficulty, and I can speak to that, having been a pioneer in the business community in Boston. And I hate to say that because it makes me sound like I'm a dinosaur, but to think that somebody as young as I am could be a pioneer was, there was nobody out there that had a communications business over 3 decades ago when I started my company. And so this, and I know how difficult it has been and how difficult it is to find, we are all undercapitalized. And this person is asking, how can he, I don't know if it's a he or a she, find grants? I know that within the philanthropy world, they're now doing what's called PRIs. And so I am sort of throwing that out to you about what do you think about philanthropy really getting engaged to help close the gap, the wealth gap for businesses of color?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question, and it's you know, a core dilemma for so many businesses, small businesses, and particularly businesses that are run by people of color and by women as well. And I think what we're starting to see is that not just through PRIs, but through PRIs are program-related investments that are vehicles for foundations to be able to use their grant-making programmatic dollars in ways that are quite different than just making a grant to a nonprofit organization. But an individual company, which is not a nonprofit, is not going to necessarily benefit directly from a grant from a foundation or a PRI type vehicle. But what is starting to happen, and kudos to the Boston Foundation, and kudos particularly to Bob Rivers, Eastern Bank, and others in the for-profit private sector who are starting to use their platforms, their ability to use their investment dollars, whether it's philanthropically or from their actual corporate positions, to start helping small businesses, particularly now what we are seeing are businesses of color being able to start benefiting from some of that kind of corporate social responsibility, from that kind of corporate investment, and acknowledgement that small businesses in those positions need additional help. They need an ability to have that additional step up that will get them going. And so there are lots of new platforms that we're seeing, one of which resides at the Boston Foundation in conjunction with Eastern Bank, one of which resides at Eastern Bank through their own foundation. But there's others, and I would suggest that that person and others who are listening start exploring that. I can be helpful if you want to reach out to me, but there are now starting to be some of these platforms and facilities to help. And also, Mayor Walsh really should be given kudos for what he is doing right now, both through his Department of Economic Development, through John Barros and others who are putting together these facilities and these opportunities to help particularly these businesses. Because right now, these businesses are really, really suffering. They are the first to go down in a situation like this. And we need to make sure that they survive. So
very true. And if you're listening, Anna, tomorrow, Get Connected is hosting a recovery and resilience of small business in the age of COVID with Bob Rivers, who is the CEO of Eastern Bank and chairman, Betty Francisco, who is an angel investor and co-founder of Amplify Latinx, Larry Andrews, who is the president CEO of Mass Growth Capital Corporation, Daryl Settles, who is a serial entrepreneur and investor, and also Natalia Urtobe, who is the director of small business for the city of Boston. So they're going to be talking exactly about what Mary Jo just mentioned. And I want to say that if you would like to participate in a focus group, Mary Jo is working with me. We are working on a platform that is going to be helpful to small businesses to catapult their business, to help them more efficiently and effectively sell their products and services during this time of social distancing. So please leave your contact in the chat. We will
that would be great. Yeah.
So thank you for that. And let me get back to the president of my alma mater, Lee Pelton. Lee, tell me what is the biggest factor? Because we are here to do some mentoring. What is the biggest factor that has contributed to your success?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Before we do, I just want to, because that was a great question and both of you responded, but I do, you know, you mentioned BECMA earlier, and maybe not everybody understands what that is. So that's a Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. I'm a trustee there. I'm a trustee, and they have a great website. It's just BECBS. And I would suggest, I think whoever asked that question, I would suggest that you go to that website. And the director has been very active during this period.
Really have.
Very active. Yeah. So I would suggest that as a site. I don't, you know, that's a great question. What's the biggest contributor? Well, I never had a mentor, so I didn't have that advantage that some folks have. I guess I would say that I always had a 5-year plan, and I always knew where I wanted to be at the end of those 5 years, and everything that I did within those 5 years was geared towards the next 5 years. Once I figured out that I wanted to be a college president, my 5-year plan was to be a college president at the age of 40. I didn't quite make it. I was 46 when I became college president. So, but I think that's it. In my younger life, in my educational life, I learned how to defer gratification. And I deferred gratification for trying to, you know, make my way forward. So I guess I would say is I've always had a 5-year plan. As I've gotten older, it's more like a 10-year plan. Now at my age, it's a 2-year plan, but in my middle years, it was a 5-year plan.
And this question, thank you, Lee. And this question is for Mary Jo. Mary Jo, when did you decide, or no, not decide, when did you know that you were successful?
Wow, that's a really good question. You know, I think when, probably when I was asked to become city editor of the Washington Post. And, you know, up until that point, I had had a couple of different, I was city editor of the Philadelphia Daily News. I was metro editor of the San Jose Mercury News. But when, you know, Ben Bradley hired me to become city editor of the Washington Post, I was like, wow, you know what? This is actually a pretty big deal. And I am working for an iconic person. And I'm also working for his boss, Catherine Graham, who was who was at that time just an incredible heroine to me.
Yeah.
So I guess it was probably then. It was intimidating, but also an incredible, like, you know, I actually knew when I was 10 years old that I wanted to be a newspaper reporter. You know, my son always says, how could you actually know at that point? But I actually did. And I went ahead and I achieved it. So to realize I had gotten to that point, I think it was then.
I love it. And Lee, I'm going to ask you, what keeps you up at night?
Everything.
Besides reading
everything. One of my jobs is to manage risk, and so that's you know, this is not in my contract, but that is one of my jobs. And so I, you know, as people will tell you, I get up in the middle of the night and I work, and I will send emails. I don't send texts anymore because that will wake people up. And if I'm lucky, I can go back to sleep for a couple of hours, but it's risk. And, you know, managing risk, that's what keeps me up at night. And so in this pandemic, if you can imagine, I mean, it's all about managing risk in an environment and a future that's really unknown to us, and how to devise a plan for reopening the college in the fall that is best for Emerson.
I'm good. Thank you. Yes, I am glad to see there is someone else who sends emails at 3 o'clock in the morning or late at night. Mary Jo, I am going to ask you, as a diversity ally, an inclusion ally, and someone I like to think of as a woke white woman, how can white people in general and white women in particular become more allies to people of color and women of color?
I think I might have got a little bit of a disconnection there. So could you just repeat it? Did you say how can I be an ally?
How can white women in general and white people be allies to people of color and women of color in particular?
You know, it's really you know, when you think about it, that's really kind of a deep down kind of question. I mean, you can talk about it on the surface and stuff, but you know, sometimes I actually think we have to get over ourselves a little bit. You know, and just
that's what I love about you, Mary Jo. You say it, tell it like it is.
Realize that, you know, one of the greatest realizations I came to really was when I was at the Washington Post, and I was in charge of covering, you know, one of the biggest stories the Post had in a long time, which was, you know, Marion Barry was the mayor of Washington at that point. He clearly had some real horrible issues. He was an addict. He eventually, you know, was arrested and charged with doing drugs. But I had to cover him and have a whole crew of reporters covering him over 4 years before that. And we knew there were problems. But he was a man who was revered in lots of ways in the, you know, the Black city of Washington, and by many others in the white city as well. And so I learned so much from that experience. And, you know, the fact that just because I might have thought something or felt a certain way, it was just not relevant necessarily to how others felt and how others reacted, and what was really going on in their concerns about what was happening with the mayor and what would happen with the city and all that stuff.
My God.
So I learned a real big lesson on what it was like to be in charge of covering a big story that had so many different, you know, issues around diversity and inclusion and stuff like that. And I think, you know, I realized, get over yourself. You are not, just because of you think you are somebody who, you know, has the best perspective and the best point of view, and that you're really operating from a point of good values and stuff, until you really, really spend some time getting to know issues and people and experiences and stuff. And I think that's when you can maybe be more woke and play that kind of role of being a true ally. But you have to invest in it.
Thank you for saying that, because it takes the opportunity to be self-reflective and to be able to look within, I think, and be honest, and to recognize that our backgrounds and our experiences informs us.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the same experience as somebody else, then sometimes we have to be willing, like I said, to walk a mile in that person's shoes, or in some way kind of inhabit their skin, to get a sense of what their mindset might be, and how it might differ from yours, and how you might be able to look at experiences from another's perspective. Like I often say, when I speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and people say, well, when you talk about white privilege, people say, well, I grew up, even though I'm white, I had a hard time, and I did not have it easy. So I am not sure that when you say white privilege that, you're talking, and I'm saying privilege is not necessarily financial privilege. That white privilege means your skin color. It doesn't say you didn't have a hard time growing up, or you didn't have obstacles in your way, but your skin color or your ethnicity was not one of those things that impacted your ability to move to the next level or to be successful, or was a barrier to your success. So thank you for that. And Lee, I'm going to ask you about how do you, in the face of this pandemic, Emerson's experience, one of the experiences of Emerson is that you give students a global perspective, and you really develop a person, and when you leave college, you really leave a whole person with a global perspective. So with the inability now to travel, how is Emerson going to bridge that gap between international studies and travel being halted?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as you know, we have a campus, we opened it up 7 years ago in Los Angeles. We've had a long-standing program in the Netherlands. I think it's almost 40 years old now. We have a 14th century castle, which is a place that is primarily for sophomores to go for a semester and study about Central Europe. We opened a campus in Paris last year, and this will be our second year, and the applications for that program are really robust. We're looking to move to Australia, and then we have programs in Barcelona and another one very soon in Switzerland. So we try to position ourselves as a global place. I like to say that our faculty are all over the world. They are. Our students are too. We're on 7 continents. We're in every continent except for Antarctica, I think. So, and so it's part of the diversity excellence for us. So, about 16% of our students, first-year students, are international students, and 3 out of 4 of those are from Japan, from China. And so immigration issues, obviously, with those students returning, it's going to be an issue for us. However, there are a number of international students who are still here in the US and who didn't go home. And so we hope that they will be able to continue their education here. We have a bunch of global programs, study abroad programs. These are short-term programs for 6 weeks. It's not likely that we'll have those this summer. In fact, we've canceled all of those, but we may be able to host those next a year from now if the world economy opens up and the virus has diminished somewhat. But we know there are a number of students who we think who will choose not to come to Boston and in this high density environment. And so we're going to try to keep them in touch with us through maybe a gap semester that we might be able to offer in one of our outposts, if that's possible, and be able to offer that to students who are already, international students, and they could, they'll have what's called kind of a local option to study there rather than to come to Boston, and maybe come to Boston at the end of the year or mid-year. The global globalism is now baked into our curriculum. And so we'll continue to have lots of courses and a curriculum that is really global based, because we believe quite obviously that, we live in a global world and we all need to have some kind of international and competency. So we're looking at a variety of things, but Colette, to be honest, that part of our, it's going to be diminished, just is. Yeah. And it's going to be diminished for a while. I hope not forever, but certainly for the fall term.
Well, I certainly hope that that it wouldn't be for too long, because that is such an integral part of what I love about Emerson, is that you truly, under your leadership, have made creating global citizens such an integral part of the experience. And I think that's a good thing, because if there's one thing that we should learn from this pandemic, is how interconnected we are as a world, and we do, that interconnectivity is so integral to our success as a universe, as a country, as a world. So I am keeping my fingers crossed that we are able to go back to that. Mary Jo, I'm going to ask both you and Lee the same question, and then we will open it up for one or two and then close out. How do you push through in your worst times?
Yeah. Well, that is such an important question and a topic to discuss right now. I mean, I can't imagine that there isn't one person amongst us, amongst this group, that, hasn't felt really unmoored or unsettled, at the very least. And, at the most, perhaps just really kind of losing hope and just feeling distraught about what's going on. So, there just hasn't been anything like this in our lifetime. And so one of the, we've experienced historically, although there are those among us in our broader community that have, and, I've gotten great comfort out of talking to both of you know about my 94-year-old father. And, he lives in Chicago. He's He lives in an independent living facility in Chicago. He's totally quarantined and has been for months. But, you know, he's a member of what we call the greatest generation. And,
Yes.
you know, he was raised in really tough circumstances in Chicago. He was raised in the Great Depression. He enlisted in the Army Air Corps when he was 17 years old. And then he was deployed. He was a gunner on B-29s, and he flew the bombing missions to Tokyo at the latter part of the Pacific Theater War. And, you know, there were many times when he was almost shot down. And yet, here's a guy who survived that. He came back to Chicago. He got married. He became an engineer. He raised 6 kids. He lost 2 of them. He went through, you know, other wars and incredible recessions and downturns. And he's like the strongest person I know. And he never talks about any of this. So I'm kind of like, when I feel stuff, I'm like, okay, we can get through this. My father is such an example of how people before us have really just sucked it up and have become, you know, they know how to get through these things and how to lead. So I take great comfort in having him as somebody that I can, he doesn't talk about it, but at least he's, you know, I'll ask him about it and he'll go, oh, this is nothing. You know, he just got tested. How was it, Dad? Oh, it was a piece of cake, you know, and all this stuff. So, but what I do, I mean, I'm a very external person. I need to have I get my energy from being with people. And so I'm just trying to keep, you know, as engaged and involved in this kind of Zoom world that we live in. And I try to help. I mean, I'm helping nonprofits. I'm on tons of boards. I'm advising small business. I'm working, you know, with my own family, small company where we're teetering on the edge right now. But it's all about, I think, that connection and trying to help. And then I'm a rower, and I can't row right now because our club is closed on the Charles River. So I'm trying to get out and, you know, explore Massachusetts and go walking as much as I can and do yoga. So I'm, you know, I'm like anybody else. I'm just trying to find all the different levers. But when I get really kind of down, I think about my dad. Talk to my dad.
Lee?
Yeah, I enjoy challenges, and this is a huge challenge, obviously. But for me, one of the privileges of being a college president is that it brings into play all of my capacities, my intellectual capacity, my academic capacity. One day I'm a human resources person, or 1 hour, and then I'm, you know, trying to solve, you know, legal issues, and so on and so forth. You know, like most colleges and universities, we run a big restaurant and a big hotel, and so I have a business. I have a business outside of Emerson. We were supposed to open up 7 restaurants up and down Tremont and Boylston, and that's not going to happen. That got delayed. And so I love a challenge because it brings into play all of my my capacities. It never occurs to me, it never occurs to me that I'll fail. I mean, I've never had that feeling before. I approach all issues in this way, which is to what's the problem and identifying the problem, because sometimes the problem is not what you think it is, and the solution is not what you think it is. You know, whatever the guy is who who made it wealthy off of, you know, McDonald's. You know,
Yeah.
they thought they were in the hamburger business. And he said, no, it's a real estate business.
Right.
Once he figured that out, then it changed everything. So you have to know what business you're in. And, you know, and so that's what I try to do. What is the problem, the real problem, and then find a solution. The other thing is that I work with incredible people. And the great thing about being in higher education is I have this ready-made talent pool, which is often underutilized. So we have 50 or 60 people, students, faculty, staff, and senior administrators. Must be at least 60 people working on this issue about the fall term. And they are great, and they come up with great ideas. I know that they will, and we're gonna find our way through. As someone said, if your dreams aren't big enough, if your dreams don't keep you up at night, they're not big enough.
They're not big enough. True.
That's true. And the other thing I tell my kids, you never know what your limits are until you exceed them. And,
very true.
And
Thank you for that. Well, this has been an incredible session by two amazing leaders in our community, and we are enriched to have you both in the Get Connected Mentor Network and for having you in our community. Thank you for taking the time to share your wisdom and your counsel and your insights. So we so appreciate it. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your summer. And for those of you who are on, tomorrow night is our small business night with a great group of business leaders, including Bob Rivers, the chairman, CEO of Eastern Bank. So have a good evening, all. And thank you to
Colette, before you go, we have to say, and I know Mary Jo would say it too, you are a force of nature. And this city is so lucky to have you as one of its leading citizens. You are absolutely everywhere. You're a person of influence. You're changing Boston in really very profound ways with your focus on diversity and getting people together, understanding that there's no substitute for conversation and so on. So I just want to say on behalf of Mary Jo, and I know everybody else, we just want to thank you for your extraordinary leadership.
Thank you.
Absolutely, my friend. This was a privilege to do.
I'm so proud to be an Emersonian. That's what, I'm a product of Emerson. That's what Emerson does for you. So I'm so delighted. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A wonderful evening.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.